Hello everyone, Computer Networking Geek here. This is a brand new YouTube channel I'm starting. I'm going to be showing you some IT demos on here, some IT labs, tutorials, things like that. This is going to be a great channel for the IT pros out there, for students, anything you like. I'm going to be demonstrating networking, network security, penetration testing, malware removal, malware labs. So a lot of neat stuff on here. If you're passionate about IT like I am, we'll stick around. Okay, so for the first tutorial / demo I'm going to show you to get ready for the penetration testing is we're going to install Kali Linux into VirtualBox here. Now I've already got Kali Linux set up and ready to go. I just haven't installed it yet, which is what we'll do in just a second here. But let me show you some basic settings that you should have for Kali Linux before you install it. So you want to go into your VM settings. Go to System. And make sure you've got at least 2 gigs of RAM. Because Kali Linux is it's not going to use every bit of that 2 gigs, but if you want it to run smoothly, ideally you want 2 gigs. One processor core is fine. Make sure you have PAE enable /NX, your executable bit. Acceleration, that's definitely a must. Have those enabled. Usually you can leave this to the default, so don't worry about that. So once you've got that, go ahead and go to display, set it to the maximum video memory, so it'll run smoothly. Have your Kali Linux ISO already linked here, so when you start the virtual machine, it'll boot right into the ISO and you can go ahead and start the installation. Audio, I don't worry about. Networking is crucial here. Since we're going to be doing penetration testing with this and testing the security of our network here, you're going to want to set it to bridge adapter. That way it can behave just like it's just another device on the network. And everything will be on the same subnet and it'll keep everything a lot simpler. You can use NAT, but you will run into problems later, especially when you try to do ARP poisoning and things like that, which we'll have labs on as well. So your best option is to go with bridged. And make sure promiscuous mode is set to allow all, so you can use Wireshark to capture traffic, analyze it, that sort of thing. So we've got all that out of the way. Go ahead and start the VM. Go to graphical install, or install if you want to do it the hard way. I like graphical install though. The installation on Kali Linux is pretty straightforward. So you just make sure your language is set correct. Country, keyboard, and it's going to do most of the work for you. Now, if you were installing from a USB, for example, there'd be a lot more work to it. There's a couple commands you have to do. You have to mount the USB, things like that. It's very simple and easy just to install from an ISO file, though. Okay, it's starting to detect network hardware. Now it's going to set up its own link local IPv6, of course. It's going to auto configure that, and it's going to attempt to locate your router, or if you have a DHCP server set up, it'll attempt to contact that. And it's conceded, and you just give it any host name. I just call it Kali. You don't have to worry about setting up a domain. You can always set that up later. And you want to set a password. Nothing too complicated. Select your time zone. You want to use the entire disk. You can do the manual route if you want some extra customization, or you can even set up an encrypted partition, but there's really no need for that in our case. So just use guided entire disk. Continue. There's our virtual disk that we made. We'll use the whole thing. I usually go all files in one partition. That seems the most stable to me. I have tried a separate home partition, but it just makes things a little more complicated later on. And we're going for simplicity here. So go all files one partition. So we've got a swap, and that's our primary. Looks good. Okay, continue. And just make sure that's right. You can go back and change it if it isn't. Select yes to write changes to disk. Continue. And now it's going to install the system. This will take a varying amount of time depending on if you're on a hard drive or a solid state. I'm running a solid state, so it shouldn't take terribly long. But if you're on a hard drive, I would say it would take anywhere from 30 to 50 minutes, depending on how powerful your PC is. But on a solid state, usually about 20 minutes. It doesn't take all that long. It's definitely quicker than installing Windows, I would say. So we'll let that install, and I'll come back to you in just a few minutes here. Okay, our installation has completed. Now the next thing it's going to do is it's going to offer you to basically go to the Kali Linux network, the Kali Linux servers, and get the latest versions of Kali. I always do this. It just makes things easier here. Otherwise, you're going to have to do it via terminal and commands, things like that. So it makes it a lot easier to do it now. So go ahead and select yes for use a network mirror and continue. You don't have to worry about proxy information unless your ISP or however you have this set up is using a proxy. But if not, just click continue. It's going to scan the mirror and retrieve a few files. Shouldn't take terribly long as your ISO is fairly new. Mine is the most current, so it only has like about 13 different files to get. I don't think that it's frozen at this point. It usually sits blank like this just for about a minute or two. And you can see there's some disk usage down here. So we'll just wait for that to finish. We're actually just about done. There's just a couple more steps to go through. Okay, now it's installing the bootloader, so we can actually boot into Kali once it's been installed. Now, the cool thing about Grub is you can actually dual boot OSs. You can even dual boot Windows alongside Kali. So, like if you're installing this on actual hardware instead of as a VM, you can actually dual boot Windows and Kali. So that's a nice option. You could even do this in VirtualBox too. So once you had Kali installed, for example, you could then just boot to your Windows ISO, install, and then just dual boot. It's a lot easier to dual boot than it used to be. I remember it being a lot more tricky. Okay, so basically this is just asking us if we want to put the bootloader to our virtual disk, and we'll make sure that's yes. Click continue. It didn't detect any other devices, of course, so just pick your virtual hard disk there. Continue. And just finishing up here. Okay, there we go. Installation is complete. So now we can boot into our new system. If you were installing from a USB, you would remove it at this point, but we're installing from ISO, so there's no need to do that. Go ahead and click continue. Basically what it's doing now is it's removing the installer from the RAM so it can reboot itself. It's closing up some things. Okay, there we go. It's going to reboot now. And there's our Grub bootloader. You can just boot into the operating system, which it will do automatically, or you can even set advanced options, which we may take a gander at in a different video. So now we are actually going to boot into Kali. Okay, there we go. Well, when you first boot up here, you're going to type in root, then type in your password. So go ahead and log in. Okay, now our desktop has come up. And once that's happened, what you want to do is go ahead and get familiar with Kali. If you've never used Linux before, this isn't really a good one to start out with. A better distro to start out with be something like Ubuntu or Mint Linux. But if you have used Linux in the past, it's not terribly hard to get around. Now, the very first thing we want to do before we do anything else is go up here to this power icon, go to wired settings. We want to make sure that our network configuration is correct. Okay, that's perfect actually. That's on my local subnet. Default gateway is correct. DNS is correct. So that part is good to go. I usually like to open up a terminal and just see if I can ping the default gateway as well, just to make sure everything's working good. So I'll do a ping here. Okay, looks good. It seems like it's got a little bit of lag there. May have to look into that. Anyway, it's pinging just fine. Control C to cancel. Okay, so basically we can just get familiar with it. Kali has a lot of things already built in. That's actually kind of the whole point of Kali, is having all these tools ready for you and ready to use. Kali does have kind of, I guess what you call, a virtual desktop. You can switch between 2 different workspaces. That's really handy. You can do screen recordings by clicking on this. That's the current account that's logged in. You can access your volume, your microphone settings from here. This is your general settings app, and it's pretty much going to be the same as other Linux distros. That's where you reboot, restart. Okay, so this is where everything's going to be, applications. This is everything that we're going to be running through. These are the ones you're going to be using most often. Firefox, Terminal, that's your file folder. That's where all your folders, things like that are going to be. Exploits, that's a GUI program for the exploits. Otherwise, this just runs in Terminal. And these other suites. And we'll cover most of these in time. Some of these are very, very advanced and take months of training, things like that to use. We're just going to cover what we can use here in our labs. Now, generally, the first set of tools you're going to look at is information gathering. ZenMap is definitely a good one. We'll probably dedicate a whole video to that. This is what you're going to use for reconnaissance, for scanning your network, doing ping scans, seeing what you can find, seeing what ports are open, things like that. It's very handy for that. And you have your vulnerability analysis. You can see what ports are vulnerable, things like that. Web application analysis. Database assessment for SQL. Password attacks. So you've got your rainbow tables. Brute force attacks. Things like that. Wireless. So you can do wireless encryption attacks. You can crack Wi-Fi passwords. Reveal hidden SSIDs. A lot of useful tools here. Version engineering can be interesting. Exploitation tools, we'll spend some time here in the future. Metasploit is going to be the main one you use. That's the one you actually use to set up exploits and do payloads, things like that. It can get pretty complex. Sniffing and spoofing, here's another good one we'll check out. EaterCap is probably my go-to one here. And I'll show you in a future video where I'll show you how to do man-in-the-middle attacks and art poisoning. So you can check the local security on your land and make sure it's nice and tight. Now, it's very hard to protect against man-in-the-middle attacks, but again, we'll discuss that in the video. But EaterCap is going to be the one we're going to use there. Then you got post-exploitation, so what are you going to do to the system after you compromise it? Forensics, reporting tools, even social engineering tools. So you can set up phishing, you can set up spam. Of course, you want to use this just within your network, or unless you're being paid to do this by a company. These kind of tools can get you in trouble if you're not careful. So just be careful. Only run them within things that you're allowed to run them in, your own network, or unless this is like your job. So just be careful with that. And then system services. And I won't go over every single one of these tools because that would take a particularly long time. But we are going to go over information gathering, sniffing and spoofing, and exploitation. Those are 3 I'm going to do for sure. And we may branch out into the others later on. So like password attacks, for example. So that is pretty much the gist of Kali. Just a brief overview of it. Here's another way you can show applications. There's just a lot of different ways you can access them and get to them. The terminal, this is going to be the one you're going to use a lot. A lot of the tools in Kali are terminal only. Some of them are GUI, which is nice, but a lot of the tools are terminal. So you need to be pretty comfortable with the Linux terminal before you get into Kali Linux. Like I said, if this is your first Linux distro, go ahead and start with Ubuntu or Linux Mint, something like that. I may also do those in another video if enough interest is shown. Okay, so in this video, we install Kali Linux, give you a brief little overview so you can get familiar with it. before we actually get into labs and doing some testing, some penetration testing. So that pretty much sums up this video. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. And in the next video, we'll get familiar with a Windows server, because that is going to be the two main OSs that we're going to be doing on this channel is Windows Server, that's going to be most of the time, and Kali Linux. So that's what we'll handle next time. Appreciate you watching. This is the Computer Network Geek. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.